Good afternoon if you're in this part of the world. Good morning if you're where Matt is. And good evening if you're in the other part of the world. This is a webinar that I hope everybody will find useful. And it's dealing with educational partnerships. And we deliberately kept the wording broad, partnerships, rather than using PPP or PFI or that type of terminology, because that's usually associated with a very kind of specific form of contracting that people are familiar with. What we've found in the social sector is that the play on the combination of infrastructure and services is quite critical. And Naif Al-Haddad, Jim Naif Al-Haddad is co-hosting this with me because we wanted to address this to some very specific questions that were coming out of the MENA region. And therefore, this is a joint webinar that's been planned and is co-hosted by the WAP MENA PPP chapter, as well as the social sector PPPs chapter. So what you're about to hear is a wide range of partnerships that have been applied and adopted in the education sector. And we've looked at the spectrum of education. So it actually goes from kindergarten to schools to vocational training to higher education, and there are different forms of partnerships that are used there. And we're also looking at what maybe most people or people are familiar with the most, which is the infrastructure type PPP, similar to what Ad was going to tell us about, which is the schools projects in Saudi. These have been implemented very, very widely in Canada and the United States, in the UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. But also some other models, which we see more in developing countries, where the pedagogical services are also included. So without further introduction, Naif, I'll just invite you to say some welcoming words, and then we'll pass to the moderator, who is Thiago Grego, who joined us from Brazil. Naif, go ahead, please.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who's attending. My name is Engineer Naif Al-Haddad. Thank you, Nasser, for this extended invitation to join on behalf of the MENA chapter for World Association of PPP units and PPP professionals. I'd like also to welcome our, dear panelists, as well as our dear attendees for this important and actually mostly at many points controversial topic. We talk about educational modules. In my course of the previous 10 years and working with PPPs on very close hands, we see in this project as well, this sector, specifically this sector, as well as the health sector, facing a lot of challenges and scrutiny, and mostly coming from the public sector. I'm talking to you today not only as a WAB member. I'm also as a very, I would say, active PPP unit executive, working on this and actually facing and I've seen these challenges. We had one project. I'm gonna speak bluntly and freely about what we have seen. We had a project for 9 schools. It was canceled in the end because of actually the lack of the public support that we have seen. There's a lot of, I would say, miscalculations in working with the public converter and with putting apples to apples in this. There's also, I would say, the misunderstanding and misconception at the public sector side, as well as the public themselves, the users. And that falls about the governmental communication and how to win over the public in getting this. And as well as the guarantees and I would say the indemnities or even the incentives provided to the public sector, to the private sector and the lenders as well. So today we're gonna hear from our dear panelists, who's going to be talking about this and explore that, actually PPPs in education goes beyond operation and building just mainly assets or schools or building. This goes beyond that. And there's very successful projects that occur across globally. Hopefully you're going to explore today in a way to propagate such kind of projects across, and hopefully that, we could push the sector to reach the satisfactory level, or it could be no longer as a small or medium-sized project. It could be at a competitive level to appeal to the private sector as well. So let's start today with Tiago. You have, I think, the order.
Yes, so we'll hand over to Tiago, who's going to be moderating this panel. Over to you, Tiago. You'd like to first of all introduce yourself and then take us through the panel.
He'll take the bullet for us.
Okay. Thank you, Nasser. Thank you, Naif. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everyone. My name is Tiago Grego. I'm a part of WAP social chapter, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you for us to discuss the educational partnership, some examples and some applications. And we are here to explore a powerful question. What happens when governments and private sector come together to save one of the most important challenges of our time, that is educating the next generation? So here we are going to discuss from California to Punjab, from Karachi to Riyadh, and we look at radically different models. Some deliver schools, others deliver full service education and workforce training. And the most important for us is to understand which models can scale, which are delivering quality, and most important of all, what's actually working. So it would be quite interesting for all of you to understand this model and to ask our dear panelists that are here that work with PPPs and other kind of partnerships as long as the last 20, 30 years discussing this matter. So you can learn from them and you can implement this on your countries. So for us to make this first transition, I would like to to call Matt McCleary, that is our first panelist. Max, the vice president at WT Partnership. He's a seasoned development executive with over 23 years of real estate and project delivery experience across public and private sectors. It's a pleasure, Matt, to have you here. And Matt will take us to the heart of the largest completed social PPP in higher education in the United States. The story of UC Merced. It's a university that grew over 7,500 in enrollment and turned it to PPP, not just to survive, but to reinvent how a campus is built. So, Matt, it's a pleasure to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Never any pressure in speaking first. Pleasure to be with all of you this morning, this afternoon, and evening. I certainly appreciated the opening comments. I think in the US market, when we talk about PPPs and alternative project delivery, you ask 100 people, you'll get 100 different answers. And I think a lot of the government and university sectors here in the United States, they do have a challenge in some of the topics that's already brought up beyond operations and maintenance, and how do you scale these projects from large scale to small scale. So as you see on the screen, a couple of key takeaways, and as I talk through here, and I know we wanted to make sure that we were prioritizing, and as Tiago said in the outset, what happens when a project is successful and gets delivered, but also make sure that some of these comments can apply to any sector or any country that might be participating here this morning. So in terms of the UC Merced, it is in Central California, and Merced is a smaller community. You can see on the left, the reason that they undertook this project, they were facing 750% growth in enrollment. They had students sleeping in cars, classes were going until midnight, and the campus had certainly become outdated. And some of the challenges the university was facing, they knew that under traditional project delivery models, they knew that the way that the university delivered these projects, if they intended to undertake this endeavor by themselves, it probably would have taken them 15 to 20 years to do this individually. And I'll touch a little bit upon some of the analytics and value for money and project delivery assessments that were conducted up front. But the second bullet point on the bottom right is also important, and I think would really apply to any market in any sector. The University of California system knew that when the university built and operated and maintained their facilities, they knew that there was significant deferred maintenance. They knew that the cost to renovate and retrofit and upgrade old buildings was exceeding the cost of building new. And these were the factors that really led to the university pursuing a PPP in this particular case. So in terms of the project timeline, you'll see that in 2013, on the left, the university decided to embark on this ambitious project. And for those of you working on projects of different sizes and scales, this timeline to the far right may seem longer. Some projects certainly are completed in a shorter period of time, and I'll touch upon some of those reasons. But you can see starting from left to right, as the university engaged in the RFQ processes, some of the challenges that I'll make sure that I highlight, there were significant delays up front. There was a 6-month delay when the initial RFQ was delayed because of technical procedural elements, and that certainly speaks to being ready when your project is ready for procurement. There was a 16-month delay between the shortlisted bidders being selected and the RFP being issued. And so for those of you counting on your computers or phone or fingers, that's almost 2 years of delays from when the procurement process started. And then you can see as we move to the right, some of the first buildings were delivered in 2018 until final delivery. And certainly when you think about the global scale of what was happening in 2020, as I toured the campus for the first time upon completion, that was still really as part of COVID. And so if you think about this project and this timeline, the university opened to 0 students because California at that time was still in COVID lockdown protocols. So in terms of some of the key transaction features and appreciating, the PPP differences in markets in different countries, one of the elements that is a primary concern in the US market is ownership. So you see on the left under ownership, at all times, the property and all of the facilities and buildings are still owned by the University of Merced, and the university retains significant control around some of the smaller retail uses on campus, the student housing rates. There was still a great level of control by UC Merced. The financing, as we've talked about, the size, the private sector brought half of the capital. And I have a summary slide next that talks about that split between equity from the private sector and what the public sector contributed. The project itself was delivered under a design build contract. There were significant value for money and project delivery assessments conducted up front, as well as the public sector comparator for the university to undertake this project. There is also a 35-year operations and maintenance contract that the consortium lead is undertaking. And as you see on the far right, this is delivered with an availability payment structure. And so for those that aren't familiar with that structure, lots of detail and hours of conversation, but the availability of the assets is what translates to the payment the university makes to the consortium lead. So temperature control, light control, technology, when the building is not up to a certain level of performance specified in the performance contracts, the university adjusts their payment to the consortium based on that performance level. So a couple of quick facts here. I apologize if I have my acres and meters conversions incorrect, but you can see approximately $737 million was raised by the private sector of the $1.25 billion project. You can see some of the images from the project, a few more images as well. And assuming that the deck will be shared with everyone calling in, there's a link at the bottom. There's a very good interactive video that's on the university's website that takes you through this. But I do want to pause for just a second. The picture in the top left, you can see that the campus itself is quite isolated. It's not in the middle of an urban area. Merced is a more agricultural area. So this campus was able to grow, and very few universities that I'm familiar with, even globally, have that amount of land to add that much new building space. So being time conscious, I think some of the key indicators on this very busy and wordy slide that I'm sharing on the left, being prepared, as I said, in the procurement phase. Unfortunately, there were some hiccups. I mean, when you talk about a 16-month delay between shortlisting bidders and the RFP release, that was one of the key lessons learned during procurement. On the construction phase, one of the key lessons learned is the university proceeded with the contract and proceeded with construction on several research buildings, and the university did not know who the tenants were going to be. And during construction, the university changed the tenants and type of research conducted in those buildings, which resulted in significant construction changes. Some of the buildings were actually decommissioned. And so there were considerable cost escalations that resulted because the university wasn't quite clear on their programming up front. And on the far right, the post-completion phase, the note that I've made to myself is document, document, document. At current time, there are no executive leadership or executive staff positions that are still there. And all the leadership of the university and all the staff leadership, they have all transitioned now to other universities. And so the staff and executive leadership that's there, they're left with thousands of pages of construction documents and performance documents that they themselves are not quite sure how the decision was made to arrive at this condition. So those were some of the key lessons learned. And I think at the end, really that element of the program and the procurement documents being ready, those are some of the key takeaways. So I appreciate the chance to share with that. And Tiago, back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Matt. It was very interesting to understand what you have done in Mercedes, and it's interesting to embrace this kind of PPP and mainly the key success factor that you've highlighted. And for the next discussion, we are transition to Akasha, and we are moving now to Pakistan. Akasha, she's the Director of Research, Outreach and Partnership at Punjab Education Foundation in the government of Punjab, where she leads the strategic programs focus on public-private partnerships, research, and education access. So Akasha brings to us an extraordinary case. Over 3.3 million children reached in low-cost private school using a performance-based per-child subsidy. And this is not charity, it's cost-effective. It delivers with a 3.9 times return on the investment for the government. And it's a quite interesting case. So Akasha, tell us how this innovative financing model works and why it's driven even in fragile contexts. Akasha, the floor is yours.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Is my screen visible to all, please?
Yes,
Thank you
It
so
is,
much.
but just, yeah, it's good
Thank
now.
you so much.
Thank you.
This is Akasha from Punjab, Pakistan. Thank you so much, the team, for this opportunity in conducting this webinar, which I consider that this is need of the time for having a discussion, reimaging, delivery for equity and quality in education. I'm director at Punjab Education Foundation. Punjab Education Foundation is an autonomous body of school education, Government of Punjab, where it is actually supplementing the efforts of the state for provision of education and educational access to every student, to every child in Punjab. Today, we're linking this public-private partnership is the turnkey solution, what we have observed for last 32 years in Punjab by implementing this in education sector, that this is the only solution for reaching out each and every child in far and near areas. Since when we totally depend on the government sector, it requires a huge budget, which probably the developing countries may not able to provide. And currently, a report says that there are 9.6 million children only in Punjab, one province of Pakistan, the largest province of Punjab, are out of school. So this is quite alarming, actually. And the only turnkey solution is this public-private partnership in education. Today, we are going to discuss that this is an innovative financing business model for provision of quality education, and this is such a solution that may not only reduce the cost, but with the reduced cost, it provides efficient in operations and provision of quality education. So innovative financing, mostly it refers to the non-traditional creative mechanism, which not only mobilize, but and while allocating and using the financial resources in order to achieve the development goals. So it has main pillars of those. That innovative financing deals with mobilizing the resources efficiently, linking it with the performance and the results, and encouraging a partnership with the known state actors while maximizing the impact in the recent currency. When we talk about the Punjab Education Foundation model, we consider it the largest public-private partnership model in education across the globe, with dealing with more than 18,000 schools across Punjab only. We're not talking about the Pakistan and other states, in Punjab only, with more than 3.7 million children studying in this sector. In these schools, the partners are not allowed to charge fees from these students. Their per child subsidy, monthly per student subsidy is paid by the government through the development budget. So through this public-private partnership, we have two basic models. We engage low-cost private schools because the infrastructure is developed. We also improve the functioning of non-performing public schools. And we uh, outsource the operational management of these schools through public-private partnership. This public-private partnership, this model is actually designed to increase access. And now we're evolving towards the improving quality of education in this. So these were the two basic models in which the private sector where it is involved, the private sector brings up with the infrastructure and all the capital cost is borne by the private sector. So when we talk about while we improve the quality, we improve the condition of the public schools in which the infrastructure is provided by the state, so the operational management is given to a private sector. And we have seen tremendously improvement in these sectors. I recently would quote an example that within last 6 months, Punjab Education Foundation has outsourced more than 11,000 public schools. And with the span of only 6 months, we have seen improvement in enrollment, which is 97% more students are enrolled to these schools. 127% more teachers are now being employed in these schools by those private sectors. So the infrastructure has been improved. So these are the facts, these are the statistics for last 6 months only. So when a private sector, private state owner, an entrepreneur is involved in an activity, it becomes an innovative, a business model. So the more infrastructure is improved, the more enrollment is in the school, the more finances that would be taken by the entrepreneur. So the ultimate objectives are achieved. Again, the innovative finances, this model, I consider that this model is a business model and we can easily link it with the innovative financing. It is a result-based financing model since the funding is linked toward the enrollment and it is linked with the verification and the quality compliance. Private sectors are engaged and this is world's largest public-private partnership model with more than 18,000 schools being outsourced. So the private sector leverage government funds. It actually unlock the private capital for the education delivery. Operational risks are borne by the private sector. So government only pays against the outcome. Efficiency is driven. So it's a scalable model. It retains the cost control while it provides the scalable access. These are some of the examples across the world. These are the models that per child subsidy result with financing is under the innovative financing model, and across the globe, these have been adopted with a successful outcome. A bit mathematics in this, that here at Punjab Education Foundation, the average per child subsidy that we pay to the partner, that is almost 11,892 rupees per year, while on the other hand, 1,500 to 1,100, there is an amount which is spent by that private investor. So against that 100% subsidy, average subsidy of a child which is given to the partner actually invests 127. So for while considering this, we have calculated that the return on investment to the government, so that is 3.9 for every 1 Pak rupee which is spent by the government through this public-private partnership model, 3.9 worth of education is actually delivered. And there are some other researches as well. You can see that through this model, the cost has been reduced to 1/3 while providing the same educational results. The more students are in the school or from that particular area, and the state takes state exam, the same students, they also appear in the same state exams and they are outperforming. So with the least 1/3 cost being invested under this model, the same outcome may be engaged, and this should be adopted at state level and have to be made scalable as well. And now the question is that when the partner co-invest and it spends 127% against that 100% subsidy that is being given. So how is this model scalable and sustainable for the partner? Actually, it covers when a partner agrees to run school at the rate, because they believe that with the economy of scale, the more students would come into the school. Since these partners are from the local area, they also become the social mobilizer. They have their roots, they have their footprints in that local area, and they convince those students' parents who are not willing to send their kids to school. Probably they prefer that their son would work somewhere and would bring some butter and bread to home. So with the community support and with the low cost model, they are able to efficiently operate and run this business model. If we calculate, like currently 3.3 million students roughly estimated that being studied in Punjab Education Foundation, and if we shift all these students to the public system, to the public school system, so that PEF partner in PEF schools, that 11,892 rupees annual per child cost against the public school bears 44,000. So that is 3 times more. So the total annual cost, if these students would be shifted to those public school and the same public schools model, so 148 against that, the public school had to, the annual cost would increase a lot. And through this model, 3.3 million students are studying. The state is actually saving 108 billion, which could be spent on the other development sectors as well. Yes, the sustainability and replicability, this model demonstrates fiscal sustainability through substantial unit cost. It encourages continuous quality investment by the partners due to market competition. It's an adaptable structure for low income and fragile state context, where it also demonstrates resilience in emergencies. Since in the low-cost private school, while taking under public-private partnership, the structure is there, the operations are there, we just adopt that school. And the people and the students and the children living in the vicinity of that particular schools, there who are not able to attend the school because of that affordability issue. So now they can enter into the school without paying a single penny. Well, thank you so much. That was all.
Thank you, Akasha. It's a lovely model, and I think it's interesting for everyone to think about it. If could this per child subsidy work in your country? So I think it's take us to understand this, because you are talking about 3.3 million children. So it's a lovely model. Congratulations for the achievements that you had done in your country. So let's now take a look at a different type of PPP. Where the private sector builds and maintains schools but doesn't deliver any teaching. So Andy, it's a strategic advisor for PPP in MENA and Central Asia. He's a Dubai-based civil engineer with more than 50 years of experience. He's a member and in the leadership social infrastructure team in DWOP, and it's our colleague that has done a lot of PPPs around the world. He is presenting the Saudi Arabia Wave 1 and 2 programs in 120 schools built under the BFON model, serving more than 100,000 students. So Andy, why separate infrastructure from pedagogy, and why it did take to make this model to work? How have you done this? So now the floor is yours. Thank you for your availability.
Thank you, Tiago. Yeah, good questions. So Saudi very much followed the British model, and they started the PPP journey around 2012, 2013, initially with energy projects, but then they looked very hard at the schools opportunities, because there was a real dire shortage of quality schools across the western region of Saudi, which takes in Jeddah, Mecca, Medina, some very large cities which had populations growing very fast and insufficient schools. So I'd like to just take you through now some of the features of this. I wonder if someone could just confirm that you can actually see my screen. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see. Okay. Okay. So look, I was very fortunate to be a key part of the professional team in terms of what was my role. I was the advisor to TBC. TBC is a part of the Ministry of Education within Saudi. And these were the Pathfinder PPP projects. They were they're well known as Wave 1 and 2, and they are quite well known because they have been successful, and they've kind of established precedent in terms of project agreements, in terms of the way that they were tackled, and the structure of the PPPs is being used again and again across the Middle East, not just in Saudi, but across the whole of the Middle East. So in terms of why was it successful? I some of this is just down to people, and I would like to mention Mosab Balburi, who's the head of TBC's PPP unit, and Mosab was a visionary leader who was able to really drive the process from start to finish, and no amount of knocks, because when you have a precedent project, there's always added scrutiny. Nothing stopped him from achieving the success that he could see ahead of us. So let me give you a little bit more detail now about the project. The two separate waves, wave 1 and 2. The first wave concentrated on Mecca and Jeddah, split pretty well evenly, 30 schools in each. Typically, the schools had around 900 pupils in each. So 30 classrooms of 30 students was the base formula around which the schools were developed. So the mathematicians amongst you will have already worked out that there was about 105,000 very happy, smiling children at the end of this program. Well, at least that's what we'd like to think anyway. So, so in terms of capex, doing it in dollars so that people across the world can relate, about 350 million capex for each of the waves, so 120 schools, so 700 million in total. And that was everything from design, included the entire design, the capex 20-year concession period on the FM, the FF&E is all included in that capex total. Debt to equity about 80-20. It's financed entirely by the private sector. However, the government did provide a letter of comfort, and there was always the structure. It's an infrastructure type project. There's always the backing of the government there. In terms of the return for investors, it's in the double figures. I'm sure it's private as to what those figures are, so I won't go there. Concession period 20 years from service availability. And although the actual initial kickoff date for starting the feasibility study was something like 2016, it took a long time to get through to financial close on the first one. It was the first major PPP schools program in the Middle East, and as such, every step of the way, every single gateway along the way was studied with great scrutiny, and as such, a lot of reviews by NCP, which is the PPP unit within Saudi, but also by the Ministry of Education and other interested parties. So every step was scrutinized heavily. There was a good level of interest from the investors. I think at one stage there were something like 100 potential investors at the EOI stage, which came down to 35 or 40 at pre-qual stage. And it was quite a challenge to actually get the numbers down to 6 for the bid on the wave one. And it was highly competitive and was won by Vision Invest, who is a large Saudi-based investor. And then when we came to wave two, arguably they had an advantage because of the fact that they were involved in wave one. But again, it was extremely competitive and the marking was extremely close. All the schools are now finished. I think there's still a few just coming up to the service availability date on wave two. Both are finished on schedule. As I say, happy clients all along the way. And in terms of the lenders were a consortium of Saudi banks. It was all funded from within the country. No off-taker as such, but just to clarify here, because I think there is probably more than one meaning of the word off-taker. So there's no off-taker agreement. MOE guarantees to take the schools. MOE is fully responsible for the education and for the number of students and so on. But there's no pedagogical service provided by the private sector. So that's the definition in this particular case. In other countries, offtake can be read in a different way. So the scope of the PPP was design, build, finance, maintain, and transfer. It's availability-based payments, so very similar to the one that was described in California, whereby it's all down to the availability of the rooms. If a classroom's not available, the contractor is hit with a penalty, as is any other part of the school or the grounds. So it's what this promotes is a very organized preventative maintenance routine, which is really perhaps the number one difference between this and any other type of school that's not run through a PPP. The advantage is, the fear of deductions drives a very high standard of FM, which I think is something we sometimes forget, that's one of the main drivers. There's no revenue risk for the private sector other than just performing their duties that they've signed up to. In terms of the risk and role allocation, if you look at the public sector, the public sector issues is provision of the land, of suitable land for development, and that's sometimes challenging, particularly in inner city areas. They are also responsible for pupil numbers, obviously, and getting the kids to the school. They're also responsible for any changes of law as the public sector. From the private sector point of view, ground risk is their responsibility. They have the opportunity at the bid stage to go drill holes and take a look at the wadi locations and all the risks associated with that. They are provided with a reference design, but there's no liability with that reference design. It's their responsibility that the risk transfer goes across. There's simple school designs that TBC provided of 4 different models, depending on the age categories of the children, from kindergarten right up to the senior school. And then they take that and they economize it. They make it more efficient. They can apply energy saving devices and value engineer it, as long as they still comply with what we call the DCR FMR, which is the output specifications provided in the bid. Technology change is one that's out there, because obviously in 20-year concession, not quite as bad as the California example. I noted that was 35 years, but over the course of 20 years, of course, technology changes. They don't have blackboards anymore, and you quickly go to a smart board, and I'm sure in 20 years' time, there won't be a smart board anymore. It'll be done on your watch or on a handheld device of some description. So that technology changes with the private sector, but it's something that you can forecast. Just a little bit more, why was it successful? What were the challenges and what were the outcomes? Some of these, again, are similar to what Akasha has talked about, and also Matt. Pathfinder status, when you're starting out in a new country, if your very first PPP, double the program, whatever you first think of, double it, because exactly the same as what happened in California, there is going to be challenges. There are going to be people taking a close look. There'll be people questioning every step of the way. Once you've got the first 2 or 3 underway, I mean, now in Saudi Arabia, periods are way shorter. There is probably half what it took on these wave 1 and 2 schools. Now, the public sector comparator, if you like, it's a bone of contention for me, because I've seen so many failures as a result of getting this bit wrong. People sometimes forget that it's for how important this is, and really it's the timing of when it comes into play that's the real issue here, because you set a public sector comparator at the outset, right down in the feasibility and business case stage, but you only find out whether you got it right or not after people have spent millions and millions of dollars on bid processes, and it could be 2 years later when somebody opens the envelope and here's the bids, and they're nowhere near what you were hoping. So my advice, above everything else that's on these slides, don't go out to tender and go with the lowest and spend ages trying to value engineer and have a BAFO to get the lowest possible price from a consultant to do your public sector comparator. Think of it a different way. Think of the impact if you get it wrong. And that impact is devastating, as anyone who's dialing in from Jordan or Oman would know. In terms of just moving on, the sites, again, sites, if the site's not suitable, discard it. As a government, don't try to cram a school into something that is not suitable. If you change from a G+1 to a G+4 because the site's really small and we'd like you to make it work, all of a sudden your costs gone out the window, and the educational outcomes will be impacted for the children, which again is one of the key drivers here. Procurement and nervous investors. Again, this was the first school, so there were a lot of those. 100 people was interested at EOI stage. When we got into the detail, you quickly saw the ones who understood PPP coming through to the fore, and the ones who thought it was just the same as a traditional job with a bit of funding thrown in. They fell away very quickly. So, again, think hard about, looking at your investors and going for people who really know the language, know how to attract the funds, how to do things. They've got the track record. They've done it before. Agreements in Saudi, it took a hell of a long time with the legals, but the legal guys went into it with the view that it's worth spending more time because this will set the precedent for years to come. And I now see this. We see bids now in other countries which have got almost identical wording. This, what we set up as a project agreement works well. Lead gold, it's a great thing to have, but it's a distraction as well. And all I would say about lead gold, nice thing to have, but do not let it take your eye off the fact that it's the educational outcomes that are far more important. And having a nice sticker on the wall to say it's gold doesn't, if you don't get the other bit right, it's of no value. Yeah. So why was it successful? I think, first of all, NCP, National Center for Privatization in Saudi, an excellent organization. They're a PPP unit that really dedicated themselves to this job to make it happen. And they supported MOE, they supported TBC, they supported me as a consultant and everything I did. And they had a big say in it. The public sector comparator, on this occasion, we spent quite a lot of money on the public sector comparator, and the winning bid was 2% away from the capex that was forecast. Now, I haven't seen that happen again. That may have been luck, but that's what happened. And as a result of that, things went smoothly. There was a very thorough, robust evaluation criteria, and you really need to think about it. What does it take from the investor to be the right one for the job? And it's not necessarily, the one who can pour concrete the best or the one who can clean floors the best. So you really have to think about what is the values that we're looking for. Sound investment in legal, technical, and financial consultants. Now, again, you might say, well, I would say that because I'm a consultant, but actually you can see on projects where those consultants have maybe not got the experience. You see the confidence draining out of the investors. Okay, and as soon as you see their confidence draining, immediately that impacts on their price. It impacts on the public sector comparator. It's falling away. It's going wrong. So invest in the advisors. Get the ones who are experienced. I think the feedback sessions, we sat with everyone who wasn't successful on wave one, and the difference on wave two was amazing. How some of those who'd lost, they learned lessons so quickly, and they gave Vision a very hard run on the second one. So yeah, this was very valuable as well. And I think the last but not least, maintain a focus on the end users. Never forget this is for the children. So every time you're making a decision, just think, how does that impact the kids? And so, if we're currently involved in a job with canines, doing a canine training center. Never forget the dogs. No matter what you're doing with the consultancy or setting up the job, never forget the end user. Always, that's the one you're doing this for. And as long as you keep that in focus, job will be a success. I've probably overrun my time, for which I apologize, and pass on to the next one. Sorry about that.
It's okay, Andy. Great thoughts about how we can mitigate some risks, and your thoughts were great for us to understand. We have some things quite similar here in Brazil and some of the difficulties. So it's nice for the audience to think about these opportunities and how can we mitigate this kind of risk. Sometimes we just are thinking about how to clear the costs, and sometimes we need to think about the kids. So how can we do this for them, and how can we do in the best way? And it was great. Thank you. And now we are going to see an opposite side. So we are going from a non-pedagogical model to where the private sector runs the schools entirely, from classroom to management. So I would like to present you Tausef Latef. He's a public-private partnership specialist advisor. He's highly accomplished in the PPP specialist and the education sector, advised with over 2 decades of experience. So let's hear about Tausef and how did this model evolve and what makes it political and financeable sustainable. So Tausef, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thiago, for the introduction. Thank you, VAP, for this opportunity. As everyone knows, I'm Tausef Latif. I'm the former director, PPP Node School Education Literacy Department, Government of Sindh. Today, I will be talking about a reform EMO project that we did in Pakistan. So here goes. So the first thing for any project to be successful is to have a strong legal and infrastructure. So the institution, Sindh was the first province to enact the PPP Act in 2010. It also has Sindh procurement rules, which has a specific chapter dedicated for public-private partnership. And it also has services sector included in it later on, because as always, all were infrastructure tilted, but then we worked it out to have social service included in it. In Sindh, the apex body for PPPs is the PPP Policy Board, which is headed by the chairman, CM, Chief Minister. And then we have the PPP unit, which is at the Finance Department. Basically, its main purpose is to promote and facilitate the development of public-private partnership projects in Sindh. Then we have the nodes, which I used to head. And this is the main department, which basically identifies the project, identify the transaction advisor, do the tendering process, do the feasibility study, and so on and so forth. An important aspect is we also have a public-private partnership support facility, which is an independent company by the government that does risk assessment and provides funding through VGF. So as in 2011, there were floods in Sindh, and they devastated tremendously bad. So USAID supported the reconstruction of about 106 schools in 10 districts of Sindh. And it was a $165 million project. And it started from construction all the way to community mobilization and reading program and capacity development through monitoring and evaluation. And this is some of the schools looked like. The capex was about 80 million out of the 165 million. The schools were state of the art with computer lab, multipurpose hall, and so forth, but it was outside the scope of the EMO reform, the construction. So we understood that for any new reform, you need to have a strong policy. And for that, we did a lot of consultation, and we did a sub-policy dialogue and workshop in order to see how the contract things would come in, then the concession agreement for the private partners would be. So we did a lot of consultation, and from that, we developed the policy, which is called the Sindh Education Management Organization Policy 2015, which is governed by the Sindh Public-Private Partnership Act and the Sindh procurement laws. It enables the government to outsource the public schools to the private sector using a robust bidding process. So how does it work? The program flows, the procurement. So the government, basically, in this instance, the School Education Literacy Department, Government of Sindh, calls for bids through competitive RFPs. And after evaluation of the technical and financial proposal, the management of the schools are handed over to the successful EMOs to implement their educational philosophy. The independent experts and auditors evaluate the EMO progress against KPIs, which improves overall the education learning environment. What is the financial model? So the financial model is that apart from the regular budget, governments have allocated specific budget for the EMO. It is placed in a special bank account, in a commercial bank account, in which it's an escrow-based payment. And once the independent expert validates the KPIs and independent auditors issues the certificates, the funds are released through VGF. So what are the rights and responsibilities and roles? So roles of the private parties are basically to appoint professional staff for overall operations and management, safety and security of the facility, purchase additional fixed assets, furniture, install solar system, establish science computer lab, hire market-based teaching and non-teaching staff, repair, maintenance, replacement of assets, and introducing of sports and extracurricular activities. What is the role of the government? The government in this instance needs to ensure that timely contract payments are there, availability of government teachers, handing over the facility in a functional condition, provision of furniture, support from district and provisional administration, which is very important, monitoring and evaluation through independent experts and auditors, and necessary interventions from time to time. So basically, there are key performance indicators that the private party has to abide by, and it translates into three areas: the management and organization, learning and teaching, that's pedagogy, and school environment. In the first instance, this EMO has to have a school management plan. They have to ensure that staff availability is there and the attendance are there of both the staff and the students. They have to make sure the student enrollment is there and the same student remains in there as a retain there for a longer period of time. Then they also have to develop lesson planning. They have to have a robust assessment system, continuous professional development, school repair and maintenance, and none the least, health and improved practices. So these are the KPIs in which they are judged and are given payments. So it's a management contract, government-based model. It's on a quarterly payment basis. The concession term is for 10 years. So how it works is the operators have to perform their duties as per the KPIs in a specified concession agreement. The actual expenditure is reimbursed quarterly. And the annuity payments are divided into two components. One is a reimbursable component, and the one is the expenditure and management fees. And the whatever the performance of the EMO is, the management fee is subject to the deduction as per the KPIs achieved. Some of the risk and allocation risk areas, land is held by the government. Design and construction is by the public sector. Enrollment demand is by the private EMO. Finance, as it's all done by the government, so it is the government responsibility. Force majeure has been kept by the public sector. Change of law, similar. The technology integration, as Andy was saying, it's with the private EMOs, and the performance risk is with the EMOs. So as per today, we have launched 7 cycles of RFP, and we have outsourced the complete 106 schools. In the initial phase, we were only sourcing out the constructed schools, but from RFP 4 onwards, we developed a model in which a number of good priorities government schools were also grouped into the model, and that basically gives us the economy of scales. To date, we have about 100,000 students that are learning in these EMO schools. We have got 11 education management organizations, but as Andy said, in the initial phase, it was quite a few, but eventually they learned, and now when we get a bit, we get quite a few of EMOs. We have got this independent experts and auditors, and we have got the big 4 to look at all the audit aspects like Ferguson, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and Reyes & Co. So basically, this is the important aspect that I want to highlight, is that from RFP 1 to RFP 6, is if you can look at it in the initial phase, because in the initial phases, the EMO had to establish their offices and have to go to their areas, and they were only catering to the EMO schools of the USAID build. So per child cost, although it's not a per child model, but we calculated it. So the per child cost was about 1,800. Now it trickled down, and as we go on in other RFPs, and when we put in group schools, the cost drastically went to around 812, and gradually it decreased from that to 707 till now. So what have we achieved? Basically, yes, students enrollment tremendously. We have seen from RFP 1 to 5 that overall impact has been 19%. Girls enrollment has increased about 38%. Boys enrollment increased by 10%. Student assessment result, because that's what we are looking for. So from RFP 1 to RFP 5, we have seen drastic improvement in the assessment from the baseline. And we have seen like from RFP 1 to 81 to RFP 5, 26, because now the EMOs and the maturity of the reform is so much that people really know how to go about it. One of the key factors is that the average number of teachers at baseline was 20, and now we have around 32 teachers in each schools. Student attendance has improved, as I mentioned, about 21%. Staff attendance has improved. Continuous CPT has been going on, and we have 2 sessions for 18 hours each year. It's about 36 hours every year. And we also have regular health and hygiene practices. One of the important aspects, if you would see, is that EMO schools teaching staff and non-teaching staff, the majority of them are public teachers, and only a few are there from the private sector, which fills in the gaps where there are no technical teachers available. In any reform, as Andy has mentioned, there are hiccups. Yes, in the initial phases, there was. One of the important aspects over here was teacher shortage, frequent transfers, over enrollment compared to the optimal enrollment, which we figured out was at 40. Challenges of school consolidation policy, some of the old blocks in the group schools needed repair, infrastructure and furniture issues. So these were some of the things that were creating a problem. There were issues of electricity and shortage of book. But how we mitigated that? Like for teachers shortage and transfer, the secretary was kind enough to have a special order made that no transfer would be made of the teachers that are present in these schools. Then for over-enrollment, we had a policy that there would be ways in which you would not be able to transfer any student out or the teacher out from these schools. Then the most important aspects was electricity issue, and we made sure that in the following RFP from RFP 3 onwards, solar was part and parcel of the reform. So these were some of the things that we tackled, and as we learned from RFP 1 to RFP 7, these were some of the issues that were tackled on as well. So why is it was successful? This is an important aspect. I think Sindh, as I mentioned, was the strongest in PPPs. So a very comprehensive PPP Act with procurement rules and regulation, and also having a strong EMO policy helped in getting this EMO a success. A strong support by the donor, and also a very strong support by the government of Sindh. We also have a very good competitive RFPs and a transparent procurement system. So that also basically encouraged people to participate it more realistically. And then we had the KPIs, which were very realistic and important. One of the features that, as it has to be done for the people at the ground level, so it was the district support team that we notified. Initially, it was the chief minister, chaired by the deputy commissioner, but then the district education officers now chair it. And it has representation from the district administration, as well as from the education department, the community, and the EMO. So what they do is they take all the problems and deal it over there at the community level. It has been tremendously good. The EMO reform has been replicated now in other provinces. Extensive research has been done on the EMO reform. And as you can see, there are links over here, and we have provided a PPP guide and toolkit. And the reform is quite scalable, as the research has witnessed. Thank you.
Great experience, Tausaf. It's beautiful to see how you, after post-road reconstruction, you have done so much in your country. It's lovely to see what you have done and the learning points that you highlighted here from the first RFP to the last one. So see, if you just had stopped on the first or the second experience, it could be a problem and you could face some issues and discussions about the cost. But as you were going on with the project, you see the costs is going lower and you have learned a lot of this. And see you ranking up in Asia, it's quite interesting to see. As long as we are learning with these schemes, we can replicate this kind of experience. So congratulations for the experience, and it's quite interesting to see what you have accomplished.
Thank you. Thank you.
For the next speaker, you are bringing.
Chiappa, just before we introduce Francesco, I want to say to the audience that if you have questions, there's a Q&A box somewhere. You find it at the bottom. Just post any questions you have in there so that we can address them when we get to the Q&A part. Thank you.
Great, Nasser. Great to highlight. You have Q&A here, so if you have any kind of question, you can address to the speaker, and in the end, you answer all the questions. So, our next speaker is Fernando Cabero Colin. He's a PPP advisor in infrastructure and investment specialist with over 18 years of experience. Fernando is going to present us how Saudi Arabia is using PPPs to bridge the skills gap through a vocational and technical education tailored to evolving labor market needs. So we have seen how to do a PPP in infrastructure, how to put it in a complete way, and now we are going to see how to bridge the skill gaps. Fernando, what makes TVIP PPP successful, and how do we align training with the real jobs for these challenges? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Thiago. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to WAP for giving me the opportunity to participate today in this panel. So I'm going to talk about how adequate public-private partnerships can improve skill enhancement and better access to work through technical and vocational education and training. So let's start with the big picture. Around the world, technical and vocational education and training, TVET, is essential to closing skill gaps and supporting more inclusive and sustainable development. In a world where labor markets are evolving so quickly, TVET systems help individuals and professionals to adapt their skills, to continue growing and remain competitive in the labor market. But to truly unlock its potential, it's especially in developing countries, we need to think carefully about how TVET is delivered efficiently, sustainably, and at scale. And here is where the private sector participation can make a real difference. In many developing countries, the challenge isn't just expanding TVET, but delivering it in an efficient way. And here, the private sector involvement has been a powerful enabler worldwide. So across a wide variety of models, governments are tapping into private expertise and investment to strengthen vocational education. But of course, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And what we see globally is that countries need to adapt different PPP models to fit their own context. So what does success look like? And let's take a look at some standout examples. The most successful TVET systems around the world share one common feature, which is public-private accountability. For example, we have a very successful one in Germany, which is the dual system, where learning takes place both at school and also in company training, with shared responsibilities in learning outcomes. Also in the Netherlands, they take a similar joint approach with strong co-investment and milestone-based funding. On the contrary, we have Australia, where they lean more on private providers, allowing for more flexibility. And also, while Singapore, on the other hand, maintains a strong public leadership, but also they leverage also industry expertise in the decision making and also in preparing the curricula. And in India, for instance, they have different models that allow for innovation and rapid scale up, supported by contractual incentives. So what can we take away from these cases? Well, from global best practices, 5 key outcomes stand out. Share accountability, first, that aligns training with real labor market needs. Then private-led delivery that allows to deliver innovation. Then teacher development, which is stronger when it is co-designed with industry players. Performance-based funding also drives improvement. So what is the broader lesson here? That is basically that, as I said before, that there is no one size fits all solution. And countries need to tailor different PPP models to their context, but also shared responsibility, clear metrics, and continuous public-private dialogue are key for success. So I am presenting here a project I had the privilege to work in as a transaction advisor in Saudi Arabia. As part of the Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, a public authority launched an initiative to strengthen workforce capabilities across different industrial cities to address the lack of high-quality training services, particularly in logistics and industrial operations, and also to make these companies to be competitive in the market. So the plan identified 6 strategic locations with the private sector tasked to design, build, finance, operate and maintain these centers, and also including the delivery of training. So to make this project viable, we explored multiple PPP options to find the best fit for the client's objectives. On the one hand, we consider user pay models where demand risk rests fully with the private partner, with different variations to mitigate these risks, including revenue sharing and also availability gap funding. On the other hand, an availability-based model was analyzed, offering fixed payments based on service delivery performance, hence reducing investors' risks. We also looked at different hybrid approaches like minimum revenue guarantee to mitigate the demand risk, which was a high concern for the private operators. So each structure brings trade-offs between fiscal exposure, risk transfer, and investor appetite. So aligning the model to both commercial and policy goals was key. So let's take a look at the main challenges that we encountered during the transaction advisory phase. Well, like many infrastructure PPPs, this project faced a mix of transactions and feasibility risks. On the transaction side, competitive dynamics were key. Potential competition launched in parallel by different training centers may pose a real risk to investors' confidence. Also, land availability and clarity on commercial freedoms added more uncertainty. And on the feasibility side, limited development of remote rural industrial cities raised concern about demand generation because, well, we need to bear in mind that at the end of the day, building only a training center is not a demand driver to attract companies, no, and hence new students. So it has to be a part of a broader economic activation strategy. So this meant the authority would also need to take on a more proactive role in demand creation, investment promotion, and also supporting training content governance. So these are the kinds of systematic factors that were addressed to unlock private participation, and they remind us that PPP models are as much about institutional readiness that are about only financial models. So thank you so much.
Great, Fernando. It was quite interesting to understand this and the performance-based funding. So it's interesting to see how the models and all around the world and what you implemented in Saudi was quite interesting. And last but not the least, we are bringing Arun Kumar to make his remarks about all the presentations and to bring some of the discussions. Arun is one of the members of the social chapter on WAP. He's here with us to make this discussion and to bring some of the thoughts that we hear from all the presenters here and all the experience that we have seen today. So Arun, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tiago, and thank you, colleagues, for this opportunity. As Tiago mentioned, that I work for African Development Bank. I manage the healthcare and education investments across Africa, private sector and Triple P especially. On the schools at African Development Bank, we provide sovereign funding, public sector funding, meaning that we provide capital to the governments and the government then deploy that capital. But what we look at is at the bank is that either we are supporting the low income part of the society, or we look at our education investments towards the TVET or job for youth in Africa. So our capital has to directly or indirectly, give some sort of a alignment with the job creation. That's what we look at. On education or schools, definitely we look at, as I mentioned, the low income part of the society and how we can support. What we have learned, over this period is especially on the health and education space, education also, we look at a very inclusive programs or projects, like school of maybe some sort of a institute of excellence, whether it is technical vocational trainings or aligning with the healthcare trainings, right? So it's very, very important point that we look at as a country and how we are going to solve the problem of the country rather than a one part of the society or a one district or one province. That's another point, because we want to see the impact overall as a society. Some of the members have highlighted that it has to be outcome based. What we have looked at is that, when we look at some of the projects at initial stage, everything looks very rosy, meaning that everybody says that we will do their own part. But when it comes to the implementation and monitoring and evaluation, we see a different picture. So whatever the kind of initial assessment or initial, outcome-based financing or outcomes we discuss, there is a misalignment at a later stage. How that happened is because of some of the risks which are not identified properly and allocated properly, whether it is about environmental social aspect, whether about operating capacity in terms of hiring the quality teachers, or even the monitoring and evaluation of the infrastructure itself. So there are a lot of gaps which we found during the implementation process and monitoring also. And that's where the private sector realized that, okay, we understood something different at initial stage, but when we saw, implementation stage, the project becomes very different, right? As Andy also mentioned, that initially you thought that you will do a G+1 or a ground floor facility, but there is a recommendation or a change of scope that you have to do G+2 or G+3, then the cost become very different. Then the project is not a healthcare project, education project. That project become a real estate project, right? So the cost is gone into something where you did not envisage. So I think that's where the feasibility study of that particular scope has to be done very in conjunction with different stakeholders. And one of the other thing I found out is that government start this process without including different stakeholders, right? Whether, maybe a development financial institution is not providing capital, but if you include them into the assessment process, you'll find out that the E&S risk, what you have envisaged, or different social aspect when you envisage, is different. Then the final step, you come into that sustainability. Some of the projects or RFP are started with that, some capital from budget allocated. But if you look at the project for 5 to 10 years, in terms of sustainability. The question is where the capital will come. Either it comes from budget, or it comes from some different pockets, or coming from different taxes. So there you will find a big misalignment. As a private sector and the government agency, it has to be ensured that there is a budget allocated. Now, what we have seen in Africa, everybody was looking at aid, right? The very rosy picture coming from US and Europe, but last 6 months have been crazy. What we have seen is that aid has gone down. Specifically, some of the sectors are affected are education, health. Those are the sectors which are highly affected. Why? Because those sectors were relying on aid, not directly from US aid, but there are some agencies in US and Europe which are supported by their aid agencies. And then the NGOs used to come in Africa and they provide those facilities. So what I'm saying is that funding tap has gone down. There is no funding available. So I think and that gives a very, very different outlook to a private operator, because you have mobilized people, you have mobilized your whole team to work on the project for 5 to 10 years, and then you realize after 2 years or 1 year there is a delay of payment. There is and then delay of the payment is a direct impact on the outcome. So that process of post implementation is critical. The risk what we have seen is the post implementation becomes very, very difficult, and that's where the risks are mainly, I think 80 to 90% of these kind of projects are still with public sector, and those risks have to be kind of assessed properly by the private sector. And I've seen that some of the private sector, they go and compete and they give a very rosy picture. And when they get the project, after some time, they realize they are into a different, a project altogether. So I think those are the things we have to look at: stakeholder management, stakeholder discussion, assessing the project's risk in a more of an inclusive way. That is the key for the success. Tiago, thank you.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you for your remarks. I think it was a lovely webinar, so we could understand a little bit about a lot of educational problems and how we can solve it from all kinds of views, and a lot of approaches that we can use in our countries and you can learn from our panelists. So I recommend all of you to see them on LinkedIn to send your questions. We still have a Q&A box. So if you have any question, I will now transfer the word to Nasser to do his remarks and to discuss about the Q&A. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Tiago. We actually have to have a prompt finish today, so I just wanted to make a couple of remarks. I think what you've heard is really quite a wide range, be it the subsector within education or the delivery of pedagogical services in different forms versus the delivery of infrastructure. I think, as Engineer Naif mentioned earlier, that they had a school project which was done as an infrastructure project and it was terminated for the life of day. And there are many other examples like this, unfortunately. I think, for me, the key thing, especially in the social sector, is for the procuring agency to ask itself the question, what is it that I want? I know it sounds really obvious, but sometimes it's more, we find that they're just trying to copy-paste another model instead of actually asking themselves, what do I want to get out of this? If it's about improving educational standards, yes, for sure, if you have a better school environment, you may have higher enrollments, less truancy, and so on. But that's not going to deliver better curriculum. It's not going to suddenly improve the management. So your starting point really needs to be addressing the type of thing that we want to get out of the project. I think the other point I would like to motivate is the fact that it worked in Canada or in France or in the UK or in Australia doesn't mean it's going to work in your country. In Saudi, the schools project worked because the monetary authority issued a long-term bond that enabled banks to lend against that. We see countries trying to mirror that, literally copy and paste the same documents that were generated by Andy and his colleagues of advisors, not realizing that they actually have to get some basics in place. Otherwise, the copy paste is not going to work. Affordability becomes a huge thing because when you're used to, say, paying 100, whatever the unit is per square meter for a school, when you go to a local contractor, once you start to add up the margins with an EPC contractor and a PPP provider on top of that, and then you're adding KPIs for availability, and you're adding KPIs for services where there isn't necessarily a supply market for delivering those services, then not surprisingly, you end up with a much higher cost. Then when you add the cost of capital, where if you haven't got the basis of having a good financial instrument in place, you know that your weighted average cost of capital is going to be extremely high. So we've seen instances where the capital cost is the equivalent of 4 or 5 years of availability repayment. Well, no country is going to move forward with that. So I'm conscious we don't have much time. We only have about 2 minutes, and we have a couple of questions. There's one that Andy says he'd like to answer. So maybe we do that and then we can come to a close. Andy, how can governments limit risks in a fully privatized PPP in education? For instance, what backup strategy should private provider go bankrupt? I don't quite understand the question, but maybe
look,
it says here Andy would like to answer this question.
Yeah, just I think I have to generalize a little bit. But look, two things. First of all, selection of the right. I think this is something I touched on previously. That selection of the right investors in the first place. People going bankrupt is tragic, and it does happen to major institutions. We saw it happen to Carillion, the old tarmac company in the UK, and that caused havoc. But I have to say, in the Middle East, a lot of the big investors that are going for these projects are extremely stable, and I think going for the right ones and not sort of venturing, if you like, giving people a chance that maybe don't have the same backing financially. It's just too risky. It's just too risky. I think the second thing is there's step-in agreements are signed in every single one of these PPPs in the Middle East, whereby, if it looks as if there's an issue bankruptcy, you can normally see the signs coming. And there's a step-in agreement. The lenders have the right to step in and appoint a new contractor. So, there are provisions made in the contract for that outcome, and a great deal of effort was made legally to get the wording right to cover that scenario. So, the step-in agreement does take care of it, and I think it's 6 months or 1 year. I think that there may be a delay, there may be a gap, but certainly the step-in agreement is very thoroughly written and signed by all the parties. So I don't know if that answers it. No, so I'm trying to keep it short, actually, because I'm sure
thanks. And
I could answer it in a lot more.
From Ahmed Shairi, which Akash said she would like to answer. So please go ahead, Akash.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, Ahmed, that's a good question. Yes, there is a misconception that under PPP, the public properties are being sold, but actually this is not the case. The public property remains with the government, and this is only the outsourcing of operational management is being outsourced to the private sector, private investor. Under some agreed terms and conditions. There is an agreement which has some legal clauses that showing the compliance standards which are required by the private organizer. And if those compliance standards are not met, the agreement, the contract may be cancelled by the government. So this is not a selling, this is outsourcing of the operational management for improvement by involving the local investor, by involving the local entrepreneur who has a strong footprint, who has strong roots in that particular area and can manage an make the operations of that particular school or any of the organization better than the person, than the organization, than the government dealing it centrally. I think, I hope I have answered your question.
I have just one kind of remark, Nasser. I just have one remark in the hope, like, you know, we could, because we're coming to wrapping up the session. I would like just to actually upload the, you know, the models which I've seen. Akasha, Telsif, Fernando, it's very great to see, especially like, you know, when you talk about like South Asian communities, which I've known so far, they're very vocal about their opinion and things that affect their daily lives, especially like, you know, the children and the, you know, such kind of thing. So winning over the public and demonstration how it could contribute to the community through such kind of, you know, effort. And at the same time, when Fernando presented that, you know, it doesn't have to be assets, it could be into like the building of the human capacity and capability through the vocalization, you know. This is something that, you know, the PPP units should address and look at. If the state is still insisting on, I would say, a fixed assets kind of program as like, you know, school buildings, the vocational program in any kind of way has to take its course, whether through that integrated kind of project or like a separate project, but it brings true value to the community as well.
Fantastic. I'd really like to thank all the panelists and Thiago for the moderation. And thank you, Naya, for this great idea to host this webinar. And we'll now bring the session to a close. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Join the other
Thank you.